This is Christian Book Blurb, brought to you by author and songwriter Matt McChlery. Get a behind-the-scenes glimpse into the lives of some of your favourite Christian authors, hear about their books and faith. Also, why not check out my website, mattmcclery.com. If you enjoy listening to this podcast, you can help keep it on the web. All you've got to do is buy me a coffee. Head over to buymeacoffee.com/mattmcclery to make a donation. There is a link in this episode's show notes. So go on, buy me a coffee today and help this podcast to keep supporting Christian books and authors. Hello and welcome to another fun-packed episode of the Christian Book Blurb podcast. I'm your host, Matt McChlery, and yet again we have another fantastic Christian author who we're going to be speaking to today about their faith, their life, and their books. And it is 2023, our second episode in the series, and it's fantastic to have you join us early in this new year, and we just pray that it'll be full of blessing and hope and life for all of our listeners. So let me just say hello to Joy. Our author today is Joy Vee. So very welcome to the show, Joy.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me. It's lovely to be here.
Very welcome to be here. Thank you for joining us and for giving us some of your time to talk about your books and your passions and the things that you do, which is fantastic. So you are an author of children's books, and mostly, I think we'll talk about some of the others a bit later. The series I've been particularly intrigued by is Kai, the stories that you've written about Kai. What can you tell us about the Kai series and the latest book in that series?
So my son has never enjoyed reading. And so I set out many years ago to write him a book that he would enjoy and read. And he still hasn't ever read any of my books, so I don't think I succeeded on that one. But as we got into lockdown, my nephews and nieces began to read books, and they could go to the library at some point and get home like 25 books each. So they would come home with 75 books stacked up in their rooms. And they were all about wizards and witches and unicorns. And I was like, hang on, what about all the good books? You know, and I suggested exciting reads like, you know, Ballet Shoes or Famous Five. And they looked at me, gone out, and went, I don't think so. So I began to think about writing books for children that really kind of showed a different option to the one that they're getting in a lot of the books nowadays. And I have a nephew called Kai, and Kai, unlike my son, does like to read. But I did want to write a series of books for those boys, especially boys, who don't like to read, really, who are just bored by it. So it's kind of short chapters, there are some pictures in it, not much, but there are some. And Kai goes on these different adventures. So in Kai's first adventure, I think like everyone, he feels like he was born to be super. He feels like there's something inside of him which is amazing, except nobody else has got the memo. So he's there feeling special and nobody else really even thinks he is, and they kind of laugh at him a little. He's the butt of the jokes, and he can't figure out why he has this burning desire to be special and yet isn't. And then he meets a friend at school. He makes a new friend, a little girl who tells him that he was born to be super. And he's like, well, how do you know? And she said, well, Jesus told me. And he just laughs at her and he thinks, well, you talk to dead people. And she's like, no, he's not. Jesus isn't dead. And he says, well, if Jesus isn't dead, you've got 24 hours to prove it. And he thinks he's been amazingly clever. But that night he has a dream that changes his life. And so that's the start of Kai's adventures. And Kai goes on a journey of finding his purpose, really.
And you've just released a book called Kai Playing His Part, sort of the most recent installment in the series. What's that about? What adventure does he go on there?
Okay, so with that one, at this point, Kai already knows Jesus and is trying to follow Jesus as best he can at school with his understanding of who Jesus is. And his, spoiler alert, but his Sunday school teacher, Alison, who is amazing, introduces them to the concept that we called in our youth, we called it practicing the presence of God. I remember as a teenager being very inspired by the book Practicing the Presence of God, written by an old monk many years ago, about that mental discipline of remembering that Jesus is with you all the time. And so I thought, well, let's take Kai on that kind of life-changing adventure of learning and practicing and remembering that Jesus is always with him. And so he begins to try to do that, and there's some ups and downs along the way, and then there's a huge curveball thrown in which wrecks everything, like there always is in a good story. But that was all of my books, my Kai books and the other series, the Sienna books. They have questions at the back so that parents can read a chapter and then have like a discussion with their child about some of the things that Kai's feeling or some of the things he's learning. And my hope is that through these discussions, parents and children together will be able to put in some reminders and be able to grow in this practice of practicing the presence of remembering Jesus together, and it can be something that they go on as a family and becomes part of their everyday conversation and becomes part of their everyday walk.
That's really useful. And I know that you seem to like writing series of books, because the Kai books is one of your series. We've also got another series called the Petrov family series, which includes the titles They Whisper About Us and The Letters She Never Sent. So are these similar in nature to the Kai books, or are they completely different?
No, they're set for a different audience. So the Kai books are aimed at children aged between kind of 5 and 9, just starting to read chapter books by themselves. And because at that age children are formulating their worldview, there is a very, very strong and a very blatant Christian message. And this is how you live for Jesus. Because they're still forming their worldview. We can say that to them and they can accept that without feeling like they're being preached at or talked down to. When it comes to the Petrov family, we're kind of at the other end of the scale. So I wrote They Whisper About Us for my teenage daughter, who is now 15. And she didn't like books that were preachy, and she didn't like books that didn't have a real sense of adventure. And during lockdown, we sat and watched some of the films that she was watching, the young adult films and books that she was into, and they're very, very dark. They're very dark. There's suicide, there's depression, there's terminal illness, cancer in kids, there's just all these horrifically dark situations. And this is what she's reading in her normal life for fun. And then when she comes to Christian fiction, it's about riding ponies and school plays. And she's like, I'm kind of bored. So I rose to the challenge and thought, I will write about the darkest thing that I can remember. And for me, that was actually my time living in St. Petersburg. I lived there after I got married for 7 months, and I was a Russian speaker, so really mixed in with the kind of Russian population. But it was shocking to me how much they were still, even in 2004, living under the shadow of the siege, especially the older people who had grown up in the light of it. And for them, they lived in the legacy of the siege of Leningrad as much then as they probably did 10, 20 years after. And it's a beautiful city, but spiritually it's a very, very dark city. And so I kind of drew on that, and I thought, what would it be like for a young girl living there about 10 years after the death of Stalin? So it's when spiritual oppression is beginning to ramp up again in the country. And so we looked at what that would feel like for a girl who has normal hopes and ambitions, but then she discovers that actually in her family history there are secrets that are going to scupper her career. and scupper her lives, and they live with these whispers that are whispered about them, and these whispers begin to cause real trouble for the family.
They're quite different to the Kai's book. Yeah,
very different. There's not questions at the end of that book for each chapter. You just kind of keep reading. Yeah.
Yeah. So those listeners who are listening to this and thinking, I've got a really young child or I've got a teenage child, there's something for them there, written for different audiences, which is really useful to know. What got you first interested in writing?
Okay, so I've always enjoyed writing. I lived in Ukraine for 7 years. I moved out there when I was 23 in 1999. So for those of you who are good at maths, I'm very old. But at that time, there was dial-up internet. I'm not sure if you can remember that. There was no social media. No mobile phones. You had to go to an internet cafe if you didn't own your own laptop. And so I got used to writing newsletters home. And so if I wanted to write a long one, I'd write it on paper. If I wanted to write a short one, I could go to the internet cafe. Internet cafes in 1990s Ukraine, very interesting. But that kind of almost honed my storytelling. I had to create a world that people hadn't otherwise experienced, and I couldn't just take a shot or a camera shot to show because nobody could see those pictures. So I would have a time called Share the Moment where I'd literally describe everything going on around me. And so I think that really did develop my skills, and everyone's like, oh, you should write a book. And I'm like, yeah, okay. And I never did, for which I think most of people in the world are grateful. And then it was like I said, it was with my son not reading books, and then my nephews and nieces just reading. They read like mad, crazy things. They're amazing children, and they read through everything so fast. But I really wanted things that would feed them, that would feed their soul, that would feed their spirit and their intellect. So it all started a couple of years ago. Before Christmas, I needed to up my present game. So I thought, if I write a story for my niece based on her and her family, then that would be, that would be a good gift for her. And
so is that where your first book, The Treasure Man, came from?
Yes, that is about Sienna and her two brothers. Yes, and so that was written for them. And that kind of answers why I like to write in series, because these characters become alive to me, and they're very real, and they are. It's amazing how many people can see themselves in my books. It's obviously all a work of fiction, not in any way related to anybody real. But it's amazing how much inspiration we draw off people we know around us. So these people become very real, and it's easy to write stories, and then more stories appear in my head. And so I just want to write more stories about them. So Sienna is for like 7 to 11-year-olds. Sienna's just in her final year of primary school. And these books talk more about, if you like, the supernatural part of our faith. So in the first one, she's learning how to listen to the Holy Spirit. What does that feel like? How do I step out in faith, and what happens when nothing happens, or when things all go wrong when I do that? And the second book, Love from Sienna, is then all about forgiveness, which is a huge topic. And I just feel if we can begin to teach our children how to forgive, and that forgiveness we extend comes from us receiving that forgiveness from Jesus, then actually we've taught them a really valid life lesson, and they can go further than us without having to struggle to learn the lessons that we struggled with so much.
A really important message to be grappling with. Really good. Now, recently, you had a Kickstarter crowdfunding campaign to raise funds to translate the first of your Kai books into Ukrainian. How did that go, and why did you do it?
Okay, so obviously, that the war has really brought Ukraine to the forefront of everyone's mind. But Ukraine is a country that I've loved for years. I'm actually married to a Ukrainian, so my children are half Ukrainian, and as I say, I lived out there for 7 years in my early adulthood, met my husband out there. And in many ways, although my home country is English and I am Britain and I'm English, my heart country has always been Ukraine. And my husband and I, we've been back in this country for 17 years and 16. We're still looking for a way to go back to Ukraine, and before the war even, we spent quite a bit of time with our daughter in prayer about, is now the right time to go back? And we just felt, actually, no, now is not the right time to go back. And, about 4 months after that, then the war broke out. So, Ukraine has become special to many people through this process, and many people are feeling that connection. But kind of the reason that I wanted to translate the books, not just because they are nice stories about hope, but also because Ukrainians are bilingual. They have 2 languages. In many ways, it's like the Welsh. So Welsh people, they can speak English and they will speak English to English people. But when they're together, they'll speak Welsh, and they're proud of the fact that they can speak Welsh. And it's really the same with Ukrainians. Ukrainians, they can all understand Russian, and but Ukrainian is their heart language. Now, we're seeing the east and the west side of Ukraine. The west side of Ukraine has been Ukrainian speaking for donkey's years. Whereas the east side, the history of Ukraine is such that under Stalin, he shoved a load of Russians, ethnic Russian people, into that area, and it really changed the makeup of the people. And so Russian became the more spoken language. And so after the initial invasion in 2014, some Russian speakers switched over to Ukrainian, but Russian was still spoken freely on the streets in Kiev and in Kharkov and all of these places that we're currently hearing, Kherson. But since the invasion in February last year, there's been a real move. All of my Russian-speaking friends now moved, and they all speak Ukrainian. But I'm very aware that there's children scattered all over Europe that want to return to Ukraine, but are actually fluent Russian speakers. So how do they learn Ukrainian when they're here and they're learning English, or they're in Germany, they're learning German, and at home they might speak Russian? And so I kind of wanted to provide an excellent translation that can be used as an exemplar of language for those children then who are wanting to keep their Ukrainian and to improve their Ukrainian. So I was really blessed to find a translator who is absolutely amazing. She herself is a Ukrainian language school teacher, so she loves the language. She's also a Christian, and she loved the message of the Kai books, although by birth she was a Russian speaker. And so she is now actually translating the book into Russian for me so that we can try to get it into Russia, which it's illegal in Russia because it's so blatantly Christian. So we're going to attempt that, and also get that to refugees, Russian refugees who are fleeing the war and mobilization and are fleeing the Putin regime in other parts of Europe. So
really interesting. Now, you have sent me a copy of the Ukrainian edition of your Kai books. I think, is it 2 books in one?
It's the first 2 books. So it's Kai Born to be Super and Kai Making It Count combined
So
together.
I've got a copy of this book that Joy Vee has kindly sent me. So it's in Ukrainian. It's the first 2 Kai books sort of together in one edition, which I will be giving away in my email newsletter giveaway a little bit later on this month. So if you are listening to this and you know Ukrainian refugee children, or you know somebody who's housing Ukrainian refugee children, or even if at school, your child goes to school and there's some Ukrainian children there or whatever, you could donate the book to the school, or you could give the book to families who are housing and looking after Ukrainian refugees, and whatever it may be. So this is a great opportunity for you to get hold of a copy of the Kai books in Ukrainian, is to sign up to my newsletter email, and then you can enter the competition to win a free copy of the Kai books in Ukrainian. So do pop over to my website, mattmcclery.com, to do that. And having said that, we'll be back continuing our chat with Joy after this. Hi, I'm author Matt McChlery. My new book, The Prison Letters, a 40-day devotional for Lent, will take you on a thematic journey through the books of Ephesians, Philippians, Colossians, and Philemon. Packed full of personal anecdotes and wisdom, the message Paul conveyed to his readers during his imprisonment is brought to life. The Prison Letters devotional is available now from my website, mattmcclery.com, and wherever good books are sold. Get your copy today. Welcome back to the Christian Book Blurb, a podcast. I am chatting with children and young adult author Joy Vee, and we've been talking about her books before the break. What I want to turn to now, Joy, is talking a little bit more about you and who you are and your faith, sort of getting a look behind the book cover to see who the author is. I'm lucky because I do these interviews sort of over the internet and we can get to see each other on camera, and I can see you've got some board games behind you on the bookshelf and all that kind of thing. So I get a bit of insight into the life of authors, but our listeners, obviously, they can't see what I can see. So let's have a little delve into your life. Are you a writer? Well, you are a writer, but is that all you do?
It's not all I do. I am one of these people that actually needs people in order to be happy and to be content in life. And so much as I love writing, I find that I need to be around people and talking to people, even for the inspiration of the stories. Especially around children. And so I actually am a trained ESOL teacher. So I teach English to speakers of other languages. And over the past few weeks have been dealing mainly with refugees and people with learning difficulties. So maybe women who have never had access to education, never been taught to read or write in their own language, struggling with issues of dyslexia, and have been working with them. I've made a shift just recently. Back in about September, I reached the end of myself and I realised I couldn't deal with adults anymore. So I have made the shift to be working alongside schools, helping with Ukrainian, Afghan refugees and helping them, which I really enjoy. So I do that for a couple of hours every day, and that kind of feeds me and then helps me disappear back into my room to write more books. And so, although I am one of these people, I like the shiny things. I like the new shiny things. I think that's why I couldn't write a full-length adult book, because I think I'd just get bored halfway through and go, oh, I want to write something else. And so children's books, it's great because by the time I'm bored, the book's finished. So, yeah.
Great. So you're a Christian. How did that happen? How did you become a Christian?
Okay, well, I was raised in a godly home, so from a very early age, I was like 9 days old when I was first in church or something like that. Just raised with an awareness of who God is, and just a practice of reading the Word and loving the Word. And so I came to that decision to follow Christ for myself at quite an early age, and for me, knowing Jesus and having him as my best friend was how I lived my childhood life. Kids sometimes ask me, why do you write books about Jesus? And I'm like, because I don't know any other way to live. I actually don't know what it would be like if I was dealing with the problems, that have been thrown up by the war. I don't know how I would cope with that without God, without knowing that ultimately there is someone who's able to do so much more than I can do, and it is able to change things that I can't change. I don't know how. I just don't know. And I figure that's probably why there is so much of a bent in children's literature towards the things of the supernatural, because there is that desire for us to think that someone else is in charge and that maybe there's a way I can access something that will give me more control. And so, yeah, so it's just been something I've always believed in. It's always been mine. It was never really like, oh, it was my parents and then I had to make a choice for myself. It was always the case, no, Jesus was my best friend. And, you know, so yeah.
That's good. So you've already mentioned that you're a parent yourself. And being brought up in a Christian home, as you've just talked about. What advice do you have for Christian parents out there on raising children? What would you say to them?
The one thing I would say, which we have found so helpful with our children, is be real. Don't try to hide anything. If you don't know the answer, or if you don't know where the money's coming from, which is often our story, or if you're not sure, it's absolutely fine to say to the children, I don't know. Can we pray about this together? What we've found is, and we've lived through times of, unemployment. We've lived through times when there's been no money. And I remember one Christmas I said to the children, I said, we don't have any money for presents this year. I mean, we literally had nothing. And I said, make your lists and we will pray about them. I said, but Jesus is the parent with the money. That's what we would always say. He's the one with the money. And so we got this list, and the things they put on this list, it was a humble list. It wasn't computers or anything like that. But I was just like, there's no way we can afford them. But we just held these lists before the Lord, all of us together, and we laid our hands on them and said, Jesus, this is what we would like to celebrate your birthday. And 2-3 days later, someone came into the cafe where I was working and gave me £100 and said, God's just told me to give you this for your children's Christmas presents. So when we gave the children their presents, we were literally able to say, this is what Jesus did. And now our children have grown, they're 15 and 16, and they are now at that stage where they're looking for the rest of their lives. Where do we go to university? And they're not coming to us and saying, how much can you give us for university? They're saying, I've prayed about it and God said I can go here. And so he'll provide the money. And how much of that do you want to pay? And, the honesty of saying to our children, this friend of ours is sick and we don't know what's going to happen, but let's pray. Actually is so much better than pretending we have it all together, and because we haven't got it all together at all. And kids grow up thinking that we have, and then they reach adulthood and they realise they haven't got it all together and they don't know where to go. Our kids have no idea. They know we're not all together, but they know that Jesus is the one who is all together. And so really I would say be honest, be vulnerable, even from an early age with your children. If they learn that they don't need to trust you, but they can trust Jesus, then actually that's the best lesson that you can teach them, in my opinion.
Really good. Do you do anything for fun? Have you got any hobbies? Board games, probably?
Well, to be fair, I enjoy a good board game, but it's hard work getting anyone else in the family to play with me. There's a thick layer of dust on some of these. Looking forward to Christmas when the siblings come and we can all sit around and play. My relaxation is from being with people, and so, cups of tea with friends. I like to think that my hobby is coffee houses and exciting hot chocolates. That's kind of what I do for fun and relaxation. Have you got a favourite food? Anything. Apart from fish.
Okay.
I don't mind a bit of salmon.
You don't like. There you go. All right.
Especially something someone else has cooked. That's always my favourite kind of food.
And if they're doing the washing up as well, definitely.
We've raised our children to do that. I can't remember the last one washed up. It's another tip. Get the kids to do the chores.
Joy, have you got anything that you're working on at the moment?
Yes.
Book-wise.
Yes. So, right now, we've just brought out the third Kai book. I'm now working on the third Sienna book, which will be out, later this year, hopefully around the spring kind of time. And that's, I think we're going to call it Go Away Sienna. And it's about Sienna having to deal with her friends literally saying, we don't want anything to do with you anymore. And so, drawing on some pretty painful lessons in my past, but the more I see my niece grow, and the more there are those arguments as girls head towards teenage years and these preteen years, they can be quite conflicting. And sometimes there is no easy answer, and sometimes there is no happy ever after, and sometimes friends just drift apart. But how do we keep God in the center of that? How do I still believe that Jesus loves me even when my best friends don't want anything to do with me? And how do I not become dreadfully insecure in that? So that's kind of the lessons that we're looking at.
Yeah. Oh, that sounds really interesting. So if you're listening to this, do keep an eye open for Joy Vee's new books that are coming out really soon. Speaking of keeping an eye out, Joy, where can people find more information about you? Are you on social media? Where can they find your books? Can they buy them online in bookshops? How does it work for you?
Okay, so like many women of mothers of teenage children, I'm on Facebook. And that's really where I'm kind of most active, either under my author name Joy Vee or under my full name, which is actually Joy Velikorodny, and so I'm kind of active on that. Kind of. I did try to employ my daughter to sort out an Instagram account for me, but that didn't work. No. So that's it. But I do have a website, and that's probably the best place to find me. So that is www.joyvee, that's V-E-E, joyvee.org. Not .com, because I'm not a com, I'm just an org. So so that's the best place to kind of find me. There's a contact form at the bottom, so anyone can write to me and I'll respond usually within 24 hours, often within 20 minutes, to be fair.
And can they find your books on your website as well?
Yes, my books are for sale on my website. Audio books for some of the Kai series, ebooks for the Kai, and couple of the Sienna books are in ebook form, and then also everything's available on Amazon. And if you want to buy from a real bookstore, please go to Glow, G-L-O, which is a Glow store in Motherwell. They are huge proponents of mine. They stock my stuff. So if you really think I want to support a local bookstore, please go to Glow Books, G-L-O Books, in Motherwell, and they'll post them out to you, and you can buy them from there.
That is fantastic. Well, thank you, Joy. Thank you so much for chatting with us. It's been really fascinating, sort of history of Ukraine and Russia all mixed in there as well. Really good. I've really enjoyed chatting. So thank you so much for being with us today. And thank you as well to the listener for listening to this podcast. As you may know by now, Christian Book Blurb happens twice a month, so there'll be another one coming out really soon. So keep your eyes and ears open for that, where I'll be interviewing another Christian author about their books, their faith, and their life. That just leaves me to say thank you for the pleasure of your company, and I hope to be with you again soon on another edition of Christian Book Blurb. Thank you, and goodbye.
Thanks for listening to Christian Book Blurb with your host, Matt McChlery. Do give it a like, give it a share, and let your friends know all about it. We do hope to see you again soon on another Christian Book Blurb.